Alright, so today's tutorial is going to be all about the while statement in Python and also how to debug code inside of Thonny and in the textbook as well. So to begin with, just think back to what we already know about the while loop. So we've used it before when we've been playing around in Reborg. So for example, you wrote statements like this inside of Reborg where you said while front is clear, and remember you had a colon at the end of that, and then you indented whatever it is you wanted to have happen. And so, for example, you'd say move here. So this one is just going to keep on moving Reborg until eventually there's a wall in front of it. Okay? Now, if you think about like how would the control structure look in a flow chart, this is really what it would be. So you would say, is the condition true? And if the answer is yes, then it does whatever's inside the loop. Then it moves back up to the top and asks, is that condition true? If the answer is still yes, it executes everything in the loop and goes back and asks the question again until eventually, is the condition true? If it is a no, then we move down to whatever else is next in our code. So another simple example here that would be helpful to know would be something like this. So we've done something kind of like this in class already, whether or not you recall, but let's run through it together. So here I call this the initialization. So I'm initializing the value of I to be 0. So we're setting I to equal 0. Then we say, while I is less than 5, let's print I. And then here we're just saying, we're going to reset I to now be whatever it used to be plus 1. So I don't know if you recall, but in class we did like a T-chart for questions like this, and I wrote down the value of I for you and the number of iterations that had gone by. And this is very much the same idea. So if you ran this, what you're going to see is you're going to get the numbers 0 all the way through 4. And the reason for that is that we set I to be 0 right off the bat. So since 0 is less than 5, then we ran the code inside here. So we printed the 0, and then we set I to be what it used to be, 0 plus 1. And then we ran it all again. Since 1 is less than 5, we print and increase, so that's why we got the 1. And then the reason that we finally end at 4 is when I is 4, that means 4 is less than 5, so this while loop came back as true. So then we printed the 4, and now we set I to be 4 plus 1, and so now we're at 5. Since 5 is not less than 5, we'd move on to the rest of our code. So just to confirm that you understand what's going on, if down here I said print next thing, like that, now what would happen is next thing would show up after all of this while loop has executed. So when the while loop is entirely done, we just move on to whatever is next. Okay? Now, there's another thing that you can do, and you can use code lens. If ever you see an example in the textbook here that says show in code lens, you can click on that and it'll load up code lens that looks like this. And here I just embedded that directly inside. And basically what code lens does is it allows you to step through the code one line at a time. So for example, if I just click forward, and because I'm zoomed in here, it's going to be hard to see, so let me just zoom out slightly. There we go. All right, so here you might be able to see this better if I go back to the beginning. Okay, so this red line, red arrow, is telling us what's about to happen next. So when I move forward, now the line that just happened is this light blue one. So we just set I to be 0, and over here you can see the variables. So in our global frame, in other words, a global variable, we know that I is set to be 0. And if I move forward again, now we're checking to see, is I less than 5? The answer is true, and so we jump into this, we print that I, and our output shows up down here. Then we say I is equal to I plus 1, so watch the variable over here. It moves up, becomes a 1, and then we jump back up into the code up here. And so you can step forward and backwards inside code lens to see what's going on, which is really helpful if there's a chunk of code that you don't understand. So what I'm going to do now is show you how you can do this exact same idea, but inside of Thonny. And so that's what I'll describe down here in the textbook. But let's just switch over to Thonny and I'll show you inside of Thonny how this works. So let's do that same chunk of code. Let's say I is set to 0, and while I is less than 5, we're going to print I, and then we're going to say I equals I plus 1. Okay, so if we run this, we're going to have to save it as something, and I'll just call this debugging demo. All right, so we get the same thing that we're used to seeing right here, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. But what if I want to step through it like what we did before? Well, there's two things that I would recommend you do. First off, go to View, and inside of View, you can click on Variables. And that's going to show up this sidebar over here. So you can see, very similar to what we had in the textbook, you can see that I is now a value of 5. And now, instead of just hitting run, if we just hit run, we still get the exact same thing. But if I want to be able to step through it one line at a time, I'm going to click on this little debug current script button right there. Looks like a little bug. So click on that. And now what you're going to see is it's going to highlight the line that's about to occur. And you can use these buttons here to move through your code and see what's going to happen. So for now, you're just going to want to use step into. So use F7 to step into your code. And when you do that, you'll see that it's going to select the 0 here, and I is set to be 0. Then if I step into again, we're going to see that we go to I is less than 5. What's the value of I? Well, it's a 0. Is 0 less than 5? The answer is true. So since it's a true, that means we jump into our while loop. We print the value of I, which is currently a 0. Then we set the value of I to now be whatever it used to be, which was 0 plus a 1. So now I is set to 1. Whoop. And what just showed up there should have been up. It was testing the while loop. For some reason, it didn't display up here. It showed me down here. But in any case, you can go through and you can continue to see how this changes from one time to the next. Again, there seems to be some error in terms of where it's displaying that question for the while loop. But you can use that to run through and watch the value of your variables as you go through your code. And I'll just hit stop here, but feel free to use that. Anytime that you're having trouble understanding a chunk of code, my suggestion would be to always just open it up in Thonny, use the debug button here, and show the variables so you can see what's going on. Okay, so now that you've seen all that, what I'm going to get you to do, oh yeah, I have one last thing that I should tell you, and I even put a little warning here in the textbook to try to remind me that I need to talk about this. So in English, if we said while x do y, for example, as soon as x was not true, we would just stop doing y immediately. But that's not quite the way it works inside of Python. So just to explain what I mean, I'm going to go back to Python here for a moment in Thonny. So let's say that there was like lots of code here, and we said print thing, for example. And I mean, we could extend this code to be as long as we wanted, but in the end, the idea would be, let's say that we made this x plus 10. Or sorry, I plus 10. Now, if I did that, and you think this through, so I initially is set to 0. Well, I is less than 5. I'm going to print I, which means I'll start by printing 0. Then I'm going to set I to be whatever it used to be plus 10, which means we're going to be all the way up to 10. 10 is definitely bigger than 5. But what I'm trying to show you is that in Python, it's not just going to immediately stop my loop just because this happened. It's going to complete the loop all the way. So what we actually see here is 0 and then thing, and then it stops. And the reason for that is the way the while loop works is it checks right at the very beginning, does this give me a true? If it does, run everything inside the loop, and then once the entire loop is done, come back up and check it again. And then if it's true, run everything inside the loop, and then come back up, check it again. Once it's all done, then we move on to anything that would be past the loop. Okay? All right, so what I want you to do right now is take a look at the practice problems at the end of this while statement page. So I just have 3 of them. So there's the practice problem for counting up. All you're going to do, write me a program that prints off the numbers from 1 to 100. Then switch it around so that it counts down from 20 down to 1 and prints blast off. That should seem remarkably familiar from something we did on our very first day with Python. And then do this kind of password problem as well. Okay? And what I'll do is I'll write solutions to each one of these, and I'll put them in our class demos folder, but please don't look at those solutions until you've come up with a solution to these, and then you can compare it to mine to make sure you understand what you're doing.